A storm brews over the Appalachian hills as lovers Megan and Lucas chase adventure down forgotten roads. Their laughter fades when the car dies before a rotting farmhouse cloaked in corn and silence. A hulking farmer, all grit and shadow, welcomes them with unsettling calm. What begins as hospitality curdles into horror. Lucas vanishes into the earth, and Megan awakens caged among grotesque trophies of the lost. Her fight to escape spirals into a nightmarish descent through blood, bone, and betrayal. In this tale of captivity and survival, every breath is borrowed, every shadow hides a predator, and harvest is coming. The Appalachian summer stretched out in waves of green, the kind of endless rolling hills that lulled travelers into a false sense of serenity. Megan leaned her head out the passenger window of the faded SUV, the warm wind pulling her hair into a wild tangle. Lucas, one hand on the wheel, grinned at her like a man who wanted to make every moment count. They had been driving since dawn, chasing the kind of road trip stories you tell years later. Detours through mountain towns, greasy diners with neon signs, photographs of abandoned cabins and trails most tourists never saw. Their laughter filled the car, but it was edged with fatigue, the quiet strain of two people relying only on each other in unfamiliar territory. The trouble started on a lonely stretch of two-lane road where the GPS lost its signal and the map app froze on a blank screen. Lucas brushed it off, confident they'd reconnect soon, but when the engine sputtered and coughed like a dying animal, Megan's stomach tightened. The car rolled to a reluctant stop in front of a narrow gravel drive leading to a farm barely visible behind a wall of cornstalks. Silence pressed in around them, the kind of silence that felt watched. Lucas popped the hood, fiddled with wires he didn't really understand, while Megan stood by swatting gnats, scanning the tree line as if something might emerge. That's when he appeared. A tall man in denim overalls, broad-shouldered but weathered, like the earth had carved lines into his face. He carried himself with the deliberate pace of someone who never needed to hurry. He introduced himself simply as the farmer, offering no first name, only a rough voice that scraped against the air. He said he had tools, maybe even a phone inside, and gestured for them to follow him up the gravel drive. Lucas shot Megan a reassuring look, his unspoken "trust me." But she caught the way the man's eyes lingered too long, like he was measuring them. The farmhouse rose ahead, its white paint long surrendered to gray, shutters crooked, porch sagging under its own weight. A line of animal skulls hung from the sidewall, bleached by the sun. And for a moment she thought they were decorations. Inside the house smelled faintly of metal and mildew. The farmer led them to a kitchen where a rotary phone sat on the counter. But when Lucas lifted the receiver, all he heard was static. "Storms play hell with the lines out here," the farmer said, "but I'll get you fixed up." He offered them water from a cloudy glass pitcher and sat across from them at the table, his gaze steady, his silence louder than conversation. Megan shifted uneasily, her eyes drifting across the walls. Instead of family photos, the frames held faded Polaroids of strangers, smiling faces, some blurry, others staring dead into the lens. She felt a chill when she noticed that in several, the faces had been scratched out with something sharp. Lucas, oblivious, thanked the farmer for his kindness. Megan's fingers tightened around the sweating glass of water she hadn't touched, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. And as dusk painted the horizon outside, the farmhouse swallowed their last shred of certainty that they were just unlucky travelers. Megan awoke to the sour smell of hay and rust, her wrists aching from where they'd been bound. The last thing she remembered was Lucas telling her to wait inside the farmhouse while he checked on the car, the faint crunch of his boots on gravel fading into silence. Then a sudden noise, a sharp cry, cut off too quickly. Now she was here, locked in a makeshift cage welded from old livestock fencing, high in the loft of a barn that creaked with every shift of the night wind. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the wood, cutting silver lines across her face. Below her, the barn was a grotesque museum. Tattered coats hung like skins on hooks. Piles of belongings, purses, shoes, backpacks sat heaped against the wall, their colors dulled with dust. Megan's breath caught when she noticed Polaroids strung on a wire, each photo clipped like laundry. The faces stared back at her, young and old, some smiling, some terrified. It took her a heartbeat to realize they weren't family portraits. They were trophies. She was surrounded by the remnants of people who had been here before her, people who never left. The farmer came and went with unnerving calm, carrying himself as though this was no more unusual than feeding cattle. He climbed the loft stairs with a tray of food, bread crusts, and a cup of water, and slid it through the bars. His voice was steady, without anger or excitement, but his words landed heavy. Others screamed too much. They never lasted. But you've got grit, might even make it through the harvest. He said the word harvest like a sermon, and Megan felt her stomach knot. She forced herself to meet his eyes, feigning a thin smile, pretending not to understand. Anything to keep him from seeing her fear. When he left, she inspected her cage with frantic precision. The bars were old, rusted, but still strong. The hinges, though, were corroded, and a narrow strip of twisted wire jutted loose from one corner. She worked it free, slicing her fingers in the process, but she clutched it tightly, her only weapon. Hours blurred together in a haze of dread, the muffled sounds of the farm surrounding her, the distant bellow of cows, the low hum of crickets, the heavy scrape of boots on the barn floor. One night, she heard something worse than silence. A low moan rose from beneath the boards, faint but human. Heart-pounding, Megan pressed her ear to the cracks in the loft floor. There were people down there, or had been. Their voices wavered like ghosts, guttural and broken. Whether they were alive or echoes of her own terror, she couldn't tell, but the sound hardened her resolve. She would not end up like them. The next time the farmer came with food, Megan hid the wire in her sleeve. As he leaned closer, setting the tray down, she lashed out, aiming for his neck. He moved with startling speed, catching her wrist in his calloused hand. The wire fell to the floor. For a moment, she thought he might snap her arm in two, but instead he smiled, slow, unsettling. Stronger than the rest, he murmured, almost admiring. He shoved her back into the straw and locked the cage with deliberate care, as though savoring her failure. That night Megan pressed her bleeding hand against her chest, trembling with rage and terror. The trophies around her whispered what she already knew. If she didn't outthink him, she would never leave this barn alive. Days bled together in the barn, each one marked only by the farmer's slow footsteps and the dull creak of the loft ladder. Megan no longer knew how many nights had passed, but hunger and exhaustion had sharpened her instincts into something feral. She waited until the farmer left to tend to his fields, then worked the cage door again, pushing at the rusted hinges until the metal groaned in protest. With a final shove, the latch bent just enough to let her squeeze through. Her breath caught in her throat as she slipped free and crouched low in the shadows. The barn stretched around her like a cavern of horrors. She moved carefully between piles of belongings, her eyes darting to every corner. Dust floated through the thin shafts of light, and the smell of rot grew thicker the farther she crept. At the far end of the barn, half hidden behind stacks of hay bales, she noticed a trap door set into the floor. A thick iron latch kept it shut, but one side hung loose as though it had been forced open before. Heart pounding, Megan pulled it back. The hinges shrieked. A wave of stench rose up, so foul it forced her to gag into her sleeve. She lowered herself down a short wooden ladder, her trembling hand clutching a lantern she had snatched from a shelf. The light fell on dirt walls and, worse, shapes. Piles of them. Bones, clothing, fragments of bodies left to rot in the damp underground pit. She staggered back, choking on bile, but the lantern beam caught something glinting among the debris. She forced herself closer, her knees shaking. There, half buried in the soil, lay Lucas's broken watch, the leather strap torn and stained. Megan's breath shattered. She clutched the watch to her chest, sobs tearing out of her before she could stop them. Grief threatened to drown her, but in its place came a cold, burning resolve. Lucas was gone, but she wasn't, not yet. She would not join him here. She climbed back into the barn, wiping her face with trembling hands, and moved toward the loft where she had hidden the strip of wire. Her every step felt like it echoed. The barn seemed alive, groaning with the weight of the dead it held. Then the footsteps came, slow, deliberate. The barn door creaked open, spilling pale light across the floor. The farmer stepped inside, lantern in hand, his silhouette a black mass against the glow. Megan froze, pressed against the shadows. She gripped the rusted blade she had scavenged from the tool wall, her knuckles white. The man paused, sniffing the air as though he could smell her fear. Then he began to climb the loft stairs. Megan struck as he reached the top, slashing wildly. The blade caught his arm, and he cursed, stumbling back. Blood slicked his shirt, but his eyes gleamed, not with pain, but with something like excitement. "Good," he rasped. "You've got fight." He lunged for her, but she dove past him, scrambling back into the loft cage. She slammed the door shut herself, locking it from the inside, shaking violently as he laughed below her. The farmer's voice rose, deeper now, almost a chant. "Harvest night's coming," he promised, "and you'll see what it truly means." Megan clutched the broken watch, her nails digging into her palm, and whispered to herself that she would never let him finish whatever ritual he imagined. She would break free, or she would burn this place to the ground trying. The storm came at dusk, rolling across the mountains with a growl of thunder that shook the barn's walls. Rain hammered the tin roof, drowning out the usual night sounds. Megan pressed her face against the bars of her cage, watching the lightning flicker across the cracks in the wood. Every nerve in her body screamed that this was her chance. The storm's fury was her cover. She had worked at the cage hinges for days, bending and loosening them until they wobbled like old teeth. Tonight, with the farmer distracted, she prayed, in the fields or the house, she put her full weight into the frame. The metal gave with a screech muffled by thunder. The door swung open. Megan crawled out, her limbs stiff from days of confinement, every movement trembling with both weakness and adrenaline. She grabbed the rusted blade she had hidden in the straw, tucking it into her waistband, and made her way toward the loft window. Below, the barn's shadows seemed alive, the storm wind whistling through cracks in the planks. She reached the narrow window at the far end, the glass long since shattered, leaving jagged edges like teeth. Lightning flared outside, revealing the endless stretch of cornfields, the muddy yard, the faint outline of the highway beyond. She could almost hear the hiss of passing cars, though she knew it was only in her head. Megan hoisted herself onto the ledge, her breath clouding in the cold rain. Her muscles screamed as she swung her legs over. The drop was far, 20 feet to the ground, broken by sharp farming equipment below. She knew it was madness, but staying was death. She whispered Lucas's name, gritted her teeth, and jumped. The impact was like fire exploding through her body. Pain shot up her leg, a sickening snap telling her what she already knew: her ankle was broken. She collapsed in the mud, screaming into the storm, her voice swallowed by the thunder. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Every instinct begged her to give up, to sink into the dirt, but survival clawed her forward. She dragged herself across the ground, nails tearing, mud filling her mouth, crawling toward the dark stretch of road she'd glimpsed through the corn. Behind her, the barn door slammed open. A lantern light cut through the rain. The farmer's voice boomed, calm and steady, even against the storm. "Megan!" he called, like a father calling a child to supper. "You can't leave, not yet." Dogs barked, snarling shapes straining against chains. Megan bit down on her scream and forced herself into the cornfield. The stalks whipped her face, rain soaking her clothes until they clung to her skin. She dragged herself on elbows and knees, each movement sending knives of pain through her leg. The rows of corn seemed endless, a maze designed to trap her. Behind her, the farmer's lantern bobbed closer, the dogs released, their howls cutting through the storm. Lightning lit the field, and for a brief second she saw the highway ahead, a ribbon of salvation. She clawed forward, inch by inch, refusing to look back. Mud splashed her face as paws thudded closer. A snarl broke behind her, and one of the dogs lunged. Megan swung blindly with the rusted blade, catching it across the muzzle. The animal yelped and fell back, buying her seconds. She pushed forward, sobbing with effort, until the corn thinned and the gravel of the roadside scraped beneath her palms. Headlights flared in the distance. A truck approached, its beams slicing through the rain. Megan stumbled upright, half hopping on her good leg, waving her arms frantically. Relief surged through her, until something yanked her backward. The farmer's hand clamped on her shoulder, iron strong. He dragged her toward the ditch, his other hand gripping the handle of a pitchfork. The storm illuminated his face, twisted with fury and something worse: joy. "Almost made it," he said, his voice low, almost admiring. "But the harvest always takes what it's owed." Megan screamed and fought, slashing at him with the blade. She caught his forearm, blood spraying, but his grip only tightened. The truck slowed, its horn blaring, but the rain and shadows hid them both in the ditch. Desperation turned Megan's fear into something sharp. Her hand found a length of rebar half buried in the mud, discarded from some roadside repair. She swung it with every ounce of strength left in her. The metal crunched against the farmer's temple. He staggered, lantern falling into the mud, its light sputtering out. She hit him again and again, screaming with rage, until he collapsed beside her, his face half sunken in the muck. The dogs whined and backed into the field, silent now. The farmer's eyes fluttered open once, glassy and unfocused. His lips moved around a whisper that chilled her blood. "The harvest never ends." Headlights washed over her as the truck finally stopped. A man jumped out, shouting, rushing toward her. Megan dropped the rebar, her entire body shaking. She fell into the mud, clutching Lucas's broken watch to her chest, the storm drowning out everything but her own ragged breaths. She had survived, but deep in her bones, she knew this was not the end. The storm had broken by morning. Sunlight spilled weakly through the hospital window, painting pale rectangles on the tiled floor. Megan lay in the bed, her leg bound in a thick cast, an IV dripping steadily into her arm. The antiseptic smell was sharp, a stark contrast to the rot and damp of the barn. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Yet safety felt alien, a costume she wasn't sure fit anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lucas's watch in the mud, the farmer's whisper echoing like a curse. The harvest never ends. Detectives had been in and out since dawn, their questions endless. Names, dates, descriptions, every detail she could recall about the farmhouse and its owner. Megan told them everything, her voice steady, even as her hands trembled beneath the blanket. The officers exchanged grim looks. One of them, a weary man with silver in his beard, finally admitted what she had already suspected. "You're the first person to come out of there alive. We've been searching for answers for years." Later that afternoon, a nurse wheeled a small television into her room. The local news was already ablaze with the story, "Horror Farm Discovered in Appalachia." Grainy aerial footage showed the property swarmed with police vehicles. Uniformed men dragged evidence bags from the barn, each one bulging with belongings, clothes, purses, wallets, Polaroids. The camera panned across a tarp-covered pit where investigators worked in silence, their faces pale. Megan turned away, pressing her hands over her ears as if she could block out the voices of the dead whispering beneath the news anchor's words. By evening, the hospital corridor outside her room buzzed with footsteps. Reporters shouted questions at officers escorting them away. Megan sat rigid, staring at the door, afraid it might swing open to reveal something worse than flashing cameras. When the door finally creaked, it was only a young deputy, his uniform soaked from the rain outside. He looked nervous, clutching a file against his chest. "Miss," he said softly, "I thought you should hear this directly." Megan's heart tightened. She gestured for him to continue. "The farmhouse records. The land was deeded under one name, but we found signs that more than one person had been living there." He paused, shifting uncomfortably. "Two sets of boots, two different meal plates in the kitchen, separate bedding. We're not sure who the other occupant is, or where they are." Megan's blood ran cold. Her throat closed as she tried to form words. The farmer's final whisper returned to her, cruel and certain. "The harvest never ends." The deputy seemed to notice her paling face. "We have every road blocked off. We'll find them," he promised, though his tone carried no conviction. He left the file on her bedside table and retreated, his boots echoing down the hall until the silence pressed back in. Megan sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the watch lying beside the file. Lucas's watch, cracked, muddy, but still ticking faintly, as if mocking time itself. She picked it up, pressed it against her chest, and let herself weep for the first time since her escape. Night fell heavy. The hospital dimmed to a hush, punctuated only by the distant squeak of wheels and the low murmur of nurses. Megan dozed fitfully, haunted by dreams of cornfields whispering in the dark. At some hour past midnight, she stirred awake. Something was wrong. The hallway outside her room was too quiet, no footsteps, no voices, just silence. Then a sound, slow, deliberate. A boot dragging lightly against linoleum. Megan froze, every muscle locking. She strained her ears, heart hammering. Another step. Closer. The shadow appeared first, stretching long across the floor beneath her doorframe. A figure moved past her room, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying the heavy gait of someone who didn't belong in a hospital. The fluorescent lights above flickered, as if bending to the intruder's presence. The figure did not pause, did not turn his head towards her door, but Megan recognized the posture, the deliberate slowness. Her hand trembled violently as she reached for the call button beside her bed, but her finger hovered, frozen in midair. She thought of Lucas, of the trophies, of the whisper in the mud. She knew. Whoever walked that hallway was not a stranger. The farmer she had killed was only half the nightmare. The harvest was still out there, and it had found her.